You boys be quiet down there!
Welcome back to Neo Geo Generation. This time we'll be looking at King of the Monsters 2, The Next Thing, from SNK, NGH number 039. SNK had a hit with the first King of the Monsters game in 1991, so of course they followed it up with this sequel in 1992. Believe it or not, this is the first time in the video series we'll be looking at a sequel to a game we've already covered. In fact, the next 3 episodes will all be about sequels to older Neo Geo games, so get ready for 4 episodes of sequel madness. King of the Monsters 2 is also the largest game we've covered so far on the series, weighing in at 74 megs. Nearly every game that's been covered so far was somewhere around 50 megs, and we're going to be getting away from that and covering larger games as we move forward here. If you recall the first King of the Monsters game, that took place in 1996. Back then, 6 monsters appeared all over Japan and slugged it out in wrestling matches, while destroying civilization in the process. 3 years have passed, and only 3 monsters remain. It looked like they would rule the Earth, but then came the alien invasion, the next thing. Will it result in the extermination of the original monsters, or will they be strong enough to survive? At any rate, the victors won't be humanity. Or could they be? In 1999, a new conflict envelops the world. I always get a chuckle out of this game's subtitle, The Next Thing. It just sounds so blunt and mindless, but perhaps they meant thing as in monster? We'll be looking at the game on my MVS cartridge. Here's a first for the games in my collection that we've covered on this series. I actually have a box for this one, but it's not a complete kit. I just have a Xeroxed art set with this one. In fact, this isn't even the right box for this cart. The serial numbers don't match. I probably got this box separately at some point. You'd be surprised how often a seller would just use a spare MVS box to ship games back in the day, back when many didn't consider MVS kit boxes to be worth anything. Wait, actually, I guess we'll be playing on the home cartridge today. Whatever, it doesn't make any difference. Like the first game, the director and planner was Hamachi Papa, with Mitsuzo Ai as the lead designer. They both have a handful of Neo Geo and pre-Neo Geo SNK games on their resume. One of the character designers was Naoto Abe, who you may know as the producer and lead artist on the most recent SNK games, KOF 14 and 15, as well as the 2019 Samurai Showdown. These folks are the same team that would go on to make Savage Rain after King of the Monsters 2. Hiroyuki Kawano, who later moved to DIMPS, was the game's producer, with SNK head Eikichi Kawasaki as executive producer. The game's soundtrack was composed by the usual SNK suspects, including Tarkun, Toshio Shimizu, and Yoshihiko Kitamura, credited as Jojo Ha Kitapi. So let's press start and jump into a game. You've got a few options here, which are the same whether you're playing on a home or arcade system. Play through the main game with 1 or 2 players, or play a one-on-one versus mode against another player. We'll begin with the main game, and take a look at the versus mode later. Press A to punch, press B to kick, and C to jump. Special moves are performed by holding down one of the 3 buttons. Like in the first game, you can collect P power-up icons to increase your monster's power level. With each level, you will gain 1 more bar of health, and an additional special move. The playable roster of the game has been reduced from 6 monsters in the first game down to only 3 monsters here in King of the Monsters 2. The trade-off is worth it because of the game's increased graphic fidelity and the new playstyle. Choose from Super Gion, Atomic Guy, or Cyber Wu. Gion got a complete redesign. He's thought to be originally a dinosaur from the Cretaceous period, but by eating the monsters Gion defeated, he apparently got upgraded to the Super version here. Wu from the first game is now a robot, Cyber Wu. It was created by the Japanese government and has been completed using the brains from other fallen monsters. Atomic Guy got an upgrade to Astro Guy by seeking out and absorbing radiation from nuclear plants. If you liked Poison Ghost, Rocky, or Beatlemania from the first game, I'm sorry, I've got bad news. Your choice of character will significantly impact the gameplay, especially due to the character's distinct special moves. Each character has a total of 3 special moves when fully powered up. At level 1, Super Geon has his Geo Sword, in which he pulls a spiky horn from his head and uses it to stab his enemies. This one is unique in that it replaces your punch button and lasts for about 5 seconds. Next he has Snake Fire, a flame that travels across the ground. And last is Earthquake. After charging, Super Geon jumps high off the screen and damages any enemy standing on the ground when he lands. It can be difficult to get the timing right on this one, but it's possible to get some bosses stuck in a loop for a while if you can time it right. Atomic Guy has Atomic Cutter at level 1, in which he throws a blast over his head through the air. Level 2 is the Neo Geo Ray, in which Atomic Guy shoots a different shaped blast straight from his upper body. Lastly, Megaton Thunder, a lightning blast from the sky which immediately damages any standing enemy. This is the most useful special move in the game for getting bosses caught in a loop. Cyber Wu has Rocket Punch at level 1, Wave Cannon at level 2, and Dual Attack at level 3. The first 2 attacks are fine if you like projectiles. The Dual Attack at level 3 is the most interesting, since it allows you to float across the screen spamming attacks for a short amount of time, which is pretty effective at gaining control against opponents, but is ultimately more of a gimmick than a practical method of safely attacking. We begin the game in Stage 1, which takes place in quote-unquote American City. According to the map screen, it's a northeastern coastal city, but judging from the landmarks, it's a composite of multiple cities. The White House suggests Washington, D.C., but there's a space shuttle on the opposite corner from the White House, so I don't know where the hell we are. I guess this is an exaggerated, surreal version of reality. Just a bit down the road, we find ourselves in Manhattan. The game hails from a more innocent time. The World Trade Center towers were the second tallest buildings in the US at the time, so it makes sense that they were included in plenty of games. The game opens with the Stage 4 boss, Beetlemaster, taunting us. The game kind of pulls a fast one because you'll be immediately attacked by the Stage 1 boss, Huge Frogger.
It's a king-size frogger.
This won't last though. You will briefly tangle with the boss before it disappears. By the way, the bosses in the game have different names depending on the region of your Neo Geo console. On Japanese systems, for example, the Stage 4 boss, Beetlemaster, is instead known as Killy Killy. I'm going to stick with the boss names from the English region for the rest of this video. The game then moves into the main stage, where it becomes a side-scroller, somewhat like a beat-em-up or brawler, unlike the first game, which was strictly a monster versus monster wrestling game. The electrified ropes from the first game that kept you inside the wrestling ring are thankfully gone in this outing. In King of the Monsters 2, we now have a very short belt-scrolling stage to move through, where our monsters are attacked by the human military, and you have a chance to unleash all kinds of destruction upon the city. You'll want to destroy stuff in order to collect P icons and get your monster fully powered up before reaching the boss. You can now pick up and throw even larger buildings than in the original, and you only need to collect 2 P icons to fully power up your monsters. In true SNK form, each boss in the game has its own theme music, and it's a good thing too, because the majority of your time in this game will be spent fighting the bosses. Unfortunately, as fun as destroying helicopters and battleships was, upon reaching the boss, Huge Frogger, this is where the game comes to a screeching halt and you will be stuck fighting for a couple of minutes. To make matters worse, even though so much effort was obviously put into the enemy and stage design, King of the Monsters 2 was balanced to be a pure coin muncher. The boss sections, which are most of the game, are where the game goes back to a lot of its wrestling roots, and a very unfortunate design choice is the grappling. Don't bother mashing the A button when you and your opponent are grappling, as these grappling matches have a predetermined outcome from the moment they begin. Each match usually opens by giving you 1 or 2 grapple wins, but soon after, the odds are stacked against you. If you attempt to play King of the Monsters as a standard brawler, punching and kicking the bosses, you will inevitably end up in these predetermined grappling matches, which will gradually suck away your life bar and necessitate regularly using up your credits. The grapple matches and constant deaths are an exercise in frustration. You can choose to play the game casually this way, and you will end up going through a ton of continues. If you want to improve at this game, the only way will be to resort to more unorthodox strategies, spamming jump attacks, utilizing the right charge special moves, and doing your best to maintain control of the play area. Is this fun? I don't know, but you end up resorting to cheap, weird strategies to survive the long matches. So you're left with the choice of either trying to do this, or just playing casually, preferably in 2-player mode with a friend. In fact, if you can find someone to play with, the game's 2-player mode is probably your best bet. This game moves along at a faster pace with 2 players, since double-teaming the bosses seems to put players much more in control of the match, whereas in 1-player mode, the bosses tend to run the show. You are able to time special attacks for right after the boss is finished engaging the other player. For example, after finishing a grapple. Like in the first game, the 2 players are able to hurt each other, so be careful, especially since the monsters take up a larger portion of the screen in this outing, leaving less screen real estate to share. The game is overall just much more manageable in 2-player mode. Playing with 2 players smooths over some of the game's roughness that's more noticeable in 1-player mode. King of the Monsters 2 is a fun casual playthrough with 2 players, although the game may wear out its welcome in the final stage. Please leave a comment if you disagree and tell us about the game's redeeming qualities in 1-player mode. I have no gripes at all with the awesome graphics and music. King of the Monsters 2 has outstanding design and presentation, showing off a new level of mastery and the power afforded by the higher meg count of this game. Personally though, since I'm not a fan of wrestling games, I still prefer the format of King of the Monsters 2 over the wrestling style of the original. So anyway, after destroying Huge Frogger, the easiest battle of the game, comes Stage 2, French City. You can tell we're in Paris because of landmarks like the Eiffel Tower, Arc de Triomphe, Luxor Obelisk, and Sacré-Cœur Basilica. You can pick up Notre Dame and toss it at your enemies. You don't want to pick up these backwards P icons, which start appearing in Stage 2. Because they will set your power level all the way back to square one, which is bad news in a game where you always want to be at full power if possible. It's too bad it isn't more like in Alpha Mission 2, where the backwards icons only set you back 1 power level. You'll also see these question mark mystery icons. More often than not, these are something bad like an explosive or a backwards P, but they can occasionally be a source of power-ups. If you brush past just the edge of the icon, then it's possible to safely reveal their contents without collecting them. The distance from the icon at which it's safe to do this is very small though, so this probably shouldn't be attempted unless you really know what you're doing. The Stage 2 boss is Eipholite. He will start out small and easy at the beginning of the battle, but after a few hits, Eipholite will grow to full size and it will become much like the other standard boss battles. Like most bosses in the game, it's possible to lock Eipholite in a loop with your special attacks. It's easiest with Atomic Guy's Megaton Thunder move. After this, Eipholite has one last phase, with a small life bar. He's left as a floating alien brain or slime blob or something that can zap you, even splitting in 2 for the very end. Wow, this guy really puts up a fight. It's easy enough to kick and punch him in this final phase, but try not to get too close. Before Stage 3, there is a quick break for the bonus battle. This is simply a button mash fest to see which monster can stay on the top of the mountain. In 2-player mode, the game pits player against player to determine who will get a bonus, while in 1-player mode, you'll just get a CPU opponent. In 1-player, if you mash fast enough, it's very doable within the 10-second time limit. In Stage 3, we're headed to the southwestern US in the Grand Canyon. Naturally, there's spaghetti western inspired music. And what can I say? They've got us Americans pegged with this one. The best features of the stage are the train, destructible bridge, and the earthquake that literally causes the piece of land you're standing on to rise above the horizon and into the clouds. The enemies are all some kind of mutant monsters with eyeballs and mouths at this point in the game. You have to stop and play whack-a-mole with these worm things in the ground. Of course, with the US being such a small country, it's only a short walk from the Grand Canyon to Mount Rushmore. The boss is Clawhead, who smashes Mount Rushmore. This is quite a creative character design. I especially like the eyes in its mouth that show up during a throw. For the next stage, we're on to the desert in the Middle East. We've got some very non-threatening quicksand pits, and what appear to be land sharks, until you land a hit on one. There's a nice midpoint transition in this stage where a sandstorm whips up and takes us to the next area. There's a little falling minigame here where you can collect power-ups. The text here at the end is confusing, telling you to press the button in a timely manner when landing in English mode, or the moment you land in Japanese mode. The Super Nintendo version of the game tells you to press any button repeatedly when landing, which seems to be a slightly more accurate description of what you're supposed to do, which is mash the buttons to get up after you land. I always try to press A or C at the moment the monster lands, but it doesn't seem to do anything. The next section has pyramids and oil refineries. Here, Beetlemaster comes back for more trash talk. He gets a body.
What? I'm in my new body.
Beetlemaster's body is, naturally, stored under a pyramid, because of course aliens built those.
The pyramids were actually built by Sears.
When his life bar is a quarter full, he divides in two. I'm surprised there's no phase at the end where the brain is floating around again. Stage 5 is the seabed in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. From here on in the game, we unfortunately won't see any further references to real-world landmarks. Boo! I wanted to break more stuff.
Take that Boulderama, take that Convenient Smart, take that nuclear power plant. Oh, fiddlesticks.
It begins with your monsters swimming down to the depths. The game tells you to break through obstacles by using the joystick, but I think they meant you have to avoid them. The Japanese mode tells you to move forward while dodging with the lever, which is a ton more accurate. The game then instructs you that you can swim using the jump button. This is one game I never would have expected to have a swim mechanic. The boss is Aqua Slug, who is quite good at being annoying and wasting time. There's a bonus area next. Rows of enemies will attack, and the game keeps count. It's not difficult, but without practice, it's easy to make a small mistake and miss that perfect run. The game has 7 stages, but stage 6, the lava zone, is just a boss battle. We're apparently located somewhere near the Philippines. This whole area is just a battle with Lavicus. He's definitely the most difficult boss yet, laying eggs with winged monsters that hatch from them. They sometimes drop power-ups, so be on the lookout. You'll want to use one of your projectile special moves against him if possible. We've made it to the final stage, which is just a boss rush plus the final boss. No problem, we're almost there, right? Nope. The bosses in this game take forever to fight, so this final stage will take half the game's playtime. It takes about a half hour or so to reach the final stage in one-player mode, and the stage itself will take an additional half hour. The whole game takes about 15 minutes less when playing with 2 players. The amount of time spent in this final stage is really bullshit and brings down the game significantly. Would it have hurt the experience to give the bosses a shorter life bar here in the final stage? I think not. I've never been able to load the memory card from the final stage and beat the game using the home mode's limited continues. You have to play this game in MVS mode or on the Neo Geo CD if you want unlimited credits. The stage opens with another one of those fall and press the button mini-games. You do get a few item drops during and between bosses, but as usual, many of the drops are hazards. So after you've finally finished fighting all these monsters again, we finally reach the final boss, Famardi.
Pizza the Hut!
Famardi impressively takes up a third of the screen, unthinkable at the time. The strategy for Famardi is the usual jump and attack to knock him down. Then he moves too fast, so you'll have to hit him with a projectile special attack. This battle is very unforgiving and tough. After defeating Fomarti, you'll get one shot at killing all of these little slime creatures within the 9-second time limit. At least the game gives you plenty of warning. If you fail, you'll get the bad ending. Your monster doesn't escape, the Earth is peaceful at last, and you won't see the end credits. If you kill all of the slime enemies on time, you'll see the good ending. Your monster will escape and rule the Earth. Then you'll see the end credits. This game has silly little animated faces to represent the game's staff, an upgrade of the smaller still faces shown during the staff role in the first game. The game's lively soundtrack is better than good, with epic moments that highlight the dramatic scenes of the game. Paradoxically, the tunes are somewhat forgettable, keeping to the background of the game's larger-than-life sound effects. The large variety of themes in the menus, stages, and during the bosses just don't really seem to linger in the mind after powering off the game, unlike in the first game. It's not that the soundtrack in the first King of the Monsters game was better, but it was catchier. The most memorable songs in King of the Monsters 2 sometimes coincide with the most annoying parts. The Stage 2 boss, the aforementioned America stage, Stage 6 Lavicus theme, and the Fomarti theme. The Versus mode offers few surprises. There is no player versus CPU option for this mode, so you need 2 players. There's only one background in Versus mode, and there's a unique song that plays. The same items from the main game are scattered in the destructible buildings, including life refills. It can be hard to win the grapple matches, even when no one's playing against you. The goal is to drain your opponent's life meter to win a round, and just like in the main campaign, you don't pin your opponent to win like you had to in the first game. If neither monster's life bar is drained, the round ends in a draw, regardless of who was ahead. There are some debug dip settings for this game that will enable invincibility, in addition to settings for displaying a bunch of debug information on screen. If you have a Unibios, you can also enable invincibility in the cheats menu. The MVS release of King of the Monsters 2 was a huge success. It was one of the first major Neo Geo quarter munchers, and seemingly every arcade operator bought the game, some of them even multiples. With both games in the series a success, it's kind of odd we never saw a King of the Monsters 3, but SNK moved on to one-on-one fighting games, and the team behind King of the Monsters moved on to Savage Reign. King of the Monsters 2 has a small lasting legacy in SNK history after the game. Cyber Wu is a playable character in Neo Geo Battle Coliseum, with Super Geon and Cyber Wu showing up in the background of the King of the Monsters stage. The characters Yuki and Ai in that game can turn into Atomic Guy. Atomic Guy is also a support character in the mobile game The Rhythm of Fighters. There are cards for all 3 monsters in the 2006 Nintendo DS game SNK vs. Capcom Card Fighters DS. Now let's take a quick look at the Neo Geo CD version of King of the Monsters 2. We're finally getting into some slightly more modern releases for the Neo Geo CD here. Since the cartridge is a 74 meg game, we're no longer looking at a game that loads everything in one shot at boot. King of the Monsters 2's initial boot takes about 54 seconds to load on a single-speed system, and 30 seconds on a CDZ. But you're not done there. King of the Monsters 2 has loading screens between each stage, which is no big deal at all, with each stage load screen lasting about 12 to 14 seconds on a single-speed system. I tested, and you can literally expect about half that on a CDZ system. But you unfortunately still won't find an arranged soundtrack in the Neo Geo CD version of this game. It's otherwise a very standard release with no surprises. They even hid the music access times during the boss appearances. So it's a fine Neo Geo CD release that should not be avoided. Like the first game, King of the Monsters 2 received 2 ports to other consoles. The Sega Genesis version of King of the Monsters 2 was developed by B-Top, published by Takara, and only released in North America. And it's a good thing too. Unlike the first King of the Monsters game, where I preferred the Genesis version, in the case of King of the Monsters 2, the SNES version is clearly superior to the Genesis. The Genesis version does away with the game's stages completely and turns the game into a round-based one-on-one fighter.
Which was the style at the time?
They even borrowed the announcer from Fatal Fury 2.
Round 2. Fight! Round 2. Fight!
But don't expect this version to be quite like the Neo Geo's Versus mode. They even made the special moves executed using conventional fighting game button combinations, rather than charging like in the original. In addition to following industry trends, it's almost as if they tried to make this one play a little more like the first game, which was more player versus player oriented. Perhaps as a consequence, this is also the only version where you can play as the boss characters, except for the final boss, Famardi, who isn't in this version at all. The music and sound effects are pretty awful in this version as well. The music is so poor, it often just barely approximates the melodies from the original tunes. One thing that is true to the original though is the extreme difficulty, so you may want to try setting it lower in the options. Unfortunately for me, this was the version I rented and played before I ever owned or played the Neo Geo version, leaving me with a bad impression of King of the Monsters 2. Some people do like this version though, and to those people I say, give teenage me his $1.99 and time back for the rental. One interesting side note, the developer of this version, B-Top, is responsible for little of note, but they are the developer of Chibi Maruko-chan Maruko Deluxe Quiz from Takara on the Neo Geo. The SNES/Super Famicom version of King of the Monsters 2 was developed by Now Production and is by far the superior of the 2 ports. This port is far truer to the original, retaining the 2-player co-op beat-em-up gameplay. The entire game is here, including Famardi, both endings, and the Versus mode. It plays a bit slower, and they've made a few changes. There's a guard button, and the L button is used to charge special moves. There's a charge meter, which persists even when you stop charging. Whenever you have a chance, you can continue charging until the meter is full, and then unleash it anytime by pressing an action button while holding L. The difficulty in this version is quite fair and manageable compared to the original. In fact, it's pretty easy. Mr. Jakes and I were able to 1cc this SNES port without much trouble. There's also a hard mode if you're looking for a bit more challenge. It may not be bigger, badder, better, but still a lot of fun for 2 players. Obviously play the Neo Geo original first, but don't avoid this good SNES port. So getting back to the Neo Geo original. There's a prototype version of the game floating around, but before you get too excited, it's not really different from the final released version. You won't see it in the prototype, but previews for the game used an earlier logo that used a larger font for The Next Thing, and a Roman numeral too. Thankfully, they didn't end up going with the awkward The Next Thing as the game's main title, though the wallpapers in the background of the final game's menus won't let you forget. In the end, I still prefer King of the Monsters 2 to the first one, with the caveat that there's so much wasted potential. Compared to the wrestling in the first game, I much prefer the concept of a 2-player brawler with giant monsters. The graphics are amazing, and the character designs are superb. At first glance, it's an awesome time, and the 2-player mode almost saves it, but in the end, the execution leaves a lot to be desired. I wish this game was more than a cheap quarter muncher, full of unfair challenge, but that's the way SNK went with this one. There is no middle ground to the challenge level of King of the Monsters 2. You either have to be a complete novice enjoying a casual play or an expert at the top of their game. Once you've gotten past the initial good impressions, it's a button-mashing, frustrating experience. I just wish they'd gone a step further to make this brilliant-looking game a joy to play. Thank you for watching Neo Geo Generation. Next time on the series, we'll be looking at another sequel, NGH-040, Sengoku 2. The game has received plenty of acclaim from fans in the past. Does it hold up? Please join me next time. Until then, go play some Neo Geo. This is Neo Alec, signing off.